we go. So all of these things, the pogroms and the Dreyfus Affair, showed that anti-Semitism was on the rise, which was the hatred of Jews. So what do we do about it? What should we do in order to make things better? Well, the idea came up around that we need to have a homeland for the Jews. That Jews should form their own country and then they wouldn't have to deal with these problems. This idea was called Zionism. See how we tie all those things together? It's thematic. It all has to do with the issue of anti-Semitism and Zionism. Good. Alright, let's go to the next person, because we actually tie her to a few other things. Emmeline Pankhurst with Lady Constance Lytton. And we can throw that in with suffrage, as well as the secret ballot and the Chartist movement. All that has to do with suffrage. What is suffrage, by the way? The right to vote. Fantastic. Why would we be interested, by the way, in having the right to vote? What's going to be the effect of having voters amongst the working class? Any thoughts?
That they would have
They have more say, sure. They are going to be able to vote for people who's going to have their interest in mind. That means we're going to see a lot of changes. A lot of the abuses that were going on during the Industrial Revolution are going to start being made illegal or done away with. So, for instance, the 16-hour workday is reduced to 12 hours and reduced to 8 hours. So things like that came from suffrage. So the Chartist movement was aimed at achieving universal manhood suffrage, so that all men could have the right to vote. Of course, the women said, hang on a minute, why are we being left out? And so the women's suffrage movement aimed at trying to gain women the right to vote. Two of the individuals involved in this were Emmeline Pankhurst and Lady Constance Lytton, both who ended up suffering a pretty severe treatment in the prisons of Britain for various crimes such as forming political clubs and inciting riots and things like that. And once in prison, they would undergo hunger strikes and were force-fed, and they had that whole situation. You guys might remember you read a blog about that.
Yeah.
So, again, we tie in these ideas all into one. So that's kind of what we're going with. By the way, secret ballot. What is a secret ballot? What does that mean? Shh, it's a secret. Don't talk about it. No, that's not true. What's a ballot? Yeah, it's what you vote on. Yeah. So that it's a secret. Why do we want a secret ballot where other people don't know what you're voting for, who you're voting for? Yeah. Why would we want that? So that no one knows who you vote for.
Yeah.
Why?
So you don't get in a disagreement.
Yeah. Well, partially. It's not just to keep people from arguing. Well, yeah, you could certainly influence someone else's voting because, you might be like, if you don't, I'm going to get you. Or it could even be something simpler like, hey, if you vote for this person, I'll give you $20. You know what I mean? So, it's, in theory, to keep things honest. We're going to skip Queen Victoria. Actually, no, we're not. I'm going to lie. Queen Victoria. Victorianism, this whole thing. Basically, what I need you to know about her is, first of all, she's Queen of England, but she also changes the culture of England, under her, England emerges as really kind of its golden age. Which, by the way, what's the most significant, most important of the Victorian ideals? Things that you needed to have, things that were parts of etiquette, all that stuff. What was the most significant? Sorry? It's not a specific element of etiquette, but this was the most important. Etiquette, hard work, all these things played into this.
Reputation.
Your reputation. Most significant of the Victorian ideals. Alright, so let's talk science. Darwin, Dalton, Lyell, Freud, Pavlov, Mendeleev, Curie, Pasteur. All of them, plus the idea of atomic theory, psychology, social Darwinism, and I think that's pretty good. All of those pertain to scientific changes that were going on during the 19th century. So what am I going to ask in terms of this stuff, guys? The most obvious thing is who did what. So I might have a question like, which of these guys developed the theory of or proved germ theory? to be true? Which of the scientists proved germ theory? Who did? Pasteur. Good. Yeah, he also developed the anthrax vaccine as well as rabies. The vaccine for rabies. He didn't develop rabies. He started foaming at the mouth. They had to put him down. That's really sad, actually. Darwin, what did he do? Yeah, theory of evolution. He did not develop social Darwinism, however. Darwin had the theory of evolution. Other socialists, basically, social psychologists, really, not socialists, came up with the idea of applying his theory to people. So that's social Darwinism, where you believe that survival of the fittest would apply to races. What did Dalton do? What did he come up with? Atomic theory. Yes, he did. Charles Lyell was a geologist who said that the Earth is much older than we actually think it is. Sigmund Freud and Pavlov, what were they?
The dog experiment.
Yep. But he didn't just like experimenting with dogs. I mean, what type of scientist was he? He was one of the earliest forms of, not sociology, but psychology. He's a psychologist. Both of them are, in fact. Psychology, by the way, being the study of the human mind and behavior. What invention did Mendeleev come up with? The periodic table, sure. And Madame Curie came up with this idea. Radioactivity, sure. So we have all these nice things we've talked about. So again, we tie all these guys together. It makes it a little bit easier to kind of work through. Now the next theme we're going to go over is imperialism. So I'm going to give you a second to catch up to where we are, because this is a whopping big list. Sorry?
Linnell?
Age of the Earth. He said that was much older than...
Oh, Lyell. Yeah. Okay, so imperialism. Let's get to our who's first. Stanley, Livingston, Menelik II, Shaka Zulu, Nasser al-Din, the Maori. Come down here. Racism, the Aborigines, Manifest Destiny, imperialism, the Berlin Conference, the Maxim gun, the Boer War, paternalism, assimilation, direct and indirect rule. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, actually that's about it. So we'll leave that alone. I suppose we could throw in these guys as well, the Sati and Purda and the Raj. So all those tie to imperialism. What is imperialism? The domination
of like other countries.
Yeah, pretty much. The textbook definition is the domination of one country by another. So, why are these people involved? Well, first of all, let's talk Africa. The African interior was more or less ignored by Europeans until the Livingston issue came to the forefront. Livingston was a missionary who got lost, and Stanley was an American newspaper editor, or reporter really, who was sent to find him. When he did, it renewed interest, and kind of created interest, I should say, of the African frontier, and so folks started going into that area. Some of these different African groups were conquered. Some resisted conquest and ultimately were conquered, such as the Zulu, led by Shaka. Others, like the kingdom of Ethiopia under Menelik II, actually defeated Europeans and remained independent. However, they were few and far between. Ultimately, most of Africa is going to be imperialized. It's not just Africa, though, either. New Zealand, the Maori were eventually defeated, although it took politicking to do so. And Nasser al-Din, who was the Shah of Persia, was more or less convinced to death to involve the British in the oil trade and also the tobacco trade. So, kind of coming back over to here, the Aborigines, again, were defeated in Australia. and in the North American continent, with the United States, the American West was conquered and various native groups suppressed, all in the name of manifest destiny, which is basically a social Darwinist aspect that the white man was ordained by God to go and conquer the continent. As far as the Berlin Conference is concerned, in 1884, the nations of Europe met so that they could divide Africa into various groupings where each European power could exert the greatest authority, meaning that they tended to lump African enemies together so that they wouldn't bind together against the Europeans invading their territory. So the Berlin Conference set up a lot of the major issues that we're going to see in Africa today. The other thing is technology played a major role for the Europeans. The Maxim gun, what was it? What was significant about the Maxim gun? It's the very first machine gun, you're right. So this technological advantage allowed the Europeans to conquer areas. The Boer War was an example of where Europeans did fight each other. In this case, it was the British and the Dutch. And eventually, of course, the Dutch lost. They ended up going north and were destroyed by the Zulu. Now, assimilation and paternalism. These are two attitudes of imperialism. For instance, we've got to have rationalization as to why we're able to go and conquer these other nations. We can't just do it because we feel like it. Morality won't allow for that, so we have to sort of justify it. And one way is, again, through social Darwinism. Another way is paternalism. Paternalism is the idea that basically Europe should be the big father figure for the less developed, less intelligent African or Indian or Southeast Asian races, and thus conquering them is actually good for them. So it's sort of this justification for imperialism. Assimilation is what the French did. Basically, we have two different ways of ruling these colonies, directly or indirectly. Directly, which is the French method, is where we would literally send in the military to control things physically. We would set up governors that would rule in the name of the French government. We'd literally absorb it into the French kingdom. And then we would expect for the various groups there, Africans or Indians, to become like the French. They would only be allowed to speak French. They would convert to Christianity, all these different things. That's assimilation. Indirect rule is what the English did, and that's to say, we basically cultivate allies that are already in that territory. So we find princes or kings or chiefs who are willing to work with the British and give us the trade concessions we want, and we let them continue to rule and offer them protection from other European powers. If they don't agree with us, we'll basically get them kicked out. We'll support maybe one of their rivals so that someone we do want is in control. By the way, you still see this in the world today. So this is the same kind of attitude. The Sati and Purta, for instance, were two religious traditions in India that were suppressed by the... Actually, I'm going to save that for a second. You know what? We're going to save that. In hindsight, that actually ties with something else I wanted to go into. All right. So you good on that? Okay. Do you see kind of what I'm doing here in terms of lumping these things together? Because if we think of them thematically, we can sort of start thinking about them like what ties them together. And again, a lot of what I'm going to be asking you guys is identification, just straight up. So, who is this person? What do they do? Things like that. All right, guys. See you tomorrow.
What